Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 2025 Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Tour. This is the first event, and we are in Weissenhausen, Germany, and the format is 10 players who play 9 games against each other, and then the top 8 make it to a knockout, and the bottom 2 are eliminated for 9th and 10th place. And today we will determine exactly who makes it to the final 8. And on top of that, we will get the first chess game between Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT to many, and Gukesh, the most recent world champion and potentially the future of the game. This is the first game that they have played, as far as we know, publicly. Maybe they've played behind the scenes, since Gukesh has become the world champion. So very exciting stuff. That will be at the end of the recap, and let's jump right into it. I also will say I recorded yesterday's recap while pretty hangry. I did not have lunch. I hadn't eaten in like 10 hours. That's just on me. And also, you might have seen my kidnappers in yesterday's recap. There was like a camera crew here, and that's all part of a documentary, not about me, but about chess, that might come out in the future. Or maybe not. I mean, I assume it will come out, but, you know, there's a chance that that just never happens. But no, that will, of course, come out. Okay, folks, let's jump in. Friendly reminder, we are playing Chess 960, Fischer Random Chess, or, as we call it, freestyle chess. And in freestyle, at the beginning of every game, a random position is drawn, with the exception of the starting position of chess, and then the players have 10 minutes to discuss among themselves, and then they play. In this first game, we have the move c4. What's funny about this first game is that every single player played c4. So Magnus Carlsen sat down for this round. He had discussed with the players, and they all had mutually agreed that the best move was c4. And what a lot of them were analyzing were this move b6. Hikaru played Hikaru. I was thinking of a completely different game, and Hikaru in that game had gone c4 f6. However, in this game it was f3 and f6, and this is the opening that was discussed. So it is quite fascinating that despite the players having zero opening preparation, unless they've somehow memorized the starting position, which would be the dorkiest crap ever, by the way, like to memorize one of the 960 possible starting positions, I think it's quite interesting that so many of them end up landing on certain opening moves. And, you know, b4, and now we actually do have, like, pretty, you know, unique stuff. So we have knight g6 from Nodirbek Abdusattorov, who, by the way, is not even the best performing Uzbek player in the event. It's actually Javahir Sindarov, who is also from Uzbekistan, and is even younger than Nodirbek. So c5 is the move chosen by Nodirbek. We have this position, and Magnus almost traps Nodirbek's queen in the corner of the board. Nodirbek here plays bishop takes g3 and escapes with his queen, but, you know, the traditional things in chess do apply. And now Magnus has the bishop pair, right? So he's going to take a little bit of space, and he's going to try to safeguard his second bishop, and also, you know, obviously play with the space advantage. Bishop f2 is chosen. We have e5 from Nodirbek, immediately looking for counterplay. f5, the knight is pushed back, and now black would absolutely love to play the move d5, and he is not going to be able to do so, which means that he will be quite restricted. You will notice that a bunch of black pawns are on the dark squares, which means, of course, that the light square on d5 is under nice control, and maybe Magnus will create an attack in the future. Now, what's funny here is castling is wrong, apparently. I mean, I can't really explain it to you. It's apparently wrong because black can put the bishop on h5, and white can now no longer play this move g4, which is some deep stuff. Instead, we have this, and now we do get g4, and Magnus maintains an advantage. He kind of locks up the center and the king side and begins to play on the queen side by bringing his rooks. He then doubles and stops black's knight from any play. This is pretty radical stuff. To trade off your bishop for the knight is a ridiculously anti-positional decision. But I think his point was that now he seals the center shut like this, and it's going to be very difficult for black to do anything. And in the opposite colored bishop situation, it is the person who is attacking that is favorable. By the way, look at this idea. Giving up a pawn, lashing out with f5 as Nodirbek. But apparently he ultimately makes a mistake, and Magnus is able to bring the queen finally on the 25th move. 25 moves were played before Magnus's queen got into the game, but now the black position is under severe pressure. Right, Nodirbek defending himself, but he's doing it incorrectly, and now all the pawns fall, and Magnus 2 out of 5 on the first day of the tournament, which is actually an even worse score than he had in the World Rapid Championship, where he had 2.5 out of 5. But here he cleans things up, and this game is over. Nodirbek resigns in this position because even though he does have 2 pawns of his own, neither one of them can move, and these pawns are almost as far apart as 2 pawns can possibly be in an endgame. 3, I should say. And they will just march. I mean, you will go king f4, g5, g6, and the a-pawn is constantly a threat to promote. Black cannot stop everything. He will need to give up at least one of the pawns to try to open up the diagonals, but it is not good enough. And the comeback is on. Yesterday, Magnus lost 3 games. Today, he's obviously trying to roar back. Now, all he has to do is make the top 8, right? So another guy who has to make the top 8 and who has struggled thus far. I mean, struggled is a strong statement, but I think he's winless. Is Hikaru, and he was unable to get a win on day 1 in this game. And by the way, obviously they have shuffled the position again. Here the king is in the center, the rook is over here and over here. To castle this way, you will have to move the knight. Probably you will need to move some center pawns as well to bring the bishops. And we do in fact see a bishop being developed as early as the second move. Generally in this format, like, as many pawns as you can push in the beginning of the game, like, as better, like, the better. Bishop c2 is almost never going to be the right second move, but obviously, you know, the threat is to take the pawn. But Fabi here responds very nicely. He plays d5 and basically says, look, Hikaru, you can take on h7, but if you do so, I'm going to defend my rook. And even though I cannot castle, this position is good for black, which is completely wicked. And also in this game, if white had played e4, there were some very interesting ideas or not maybe c4. Like, for example, h5 is a very fascinating move in some positions because you can even put a pawn on h4 and just completely restrict this knight, which could be very interesting. You know, in general, there are sometimes these like random pawn advancements early that restrict the knight. Okay, obviously that's not happening. Knight g3, f5. Fabiano builds up a nice little stonewall. Hikaru allegedly blundering on the 7th move by castling because his knight will get shoved backwards here. And apparently just a move like queen d6, bishop d7, and g5 is restricting white so much that his knight in the corner is never making it back into the game. Probably Hikaru thought he would play in the center and quickly bring his knight. The computer does not like it, which is just you know, a ridiculous thing about the starting positions is like sometimes your knight just goes to the corner, it will never escape. But obviously here, that's not what happens. Both guys are ultimately trading their knight outpost. Fabiano lashing out on the queen side. Almost all his pieces are on the home rank. Bishop d2, bishop a6. By the way, the reason I'm delaying Magnus versus Gukesh is not because I want you to watch longer so I can run more ads. It was the final game of the day, and it determined the seeding. So I would show you that game first, but I like to think that you have some patience. The queen goes to d5, right? We have bishop back to d1, rook b8, and I mean, just a mess of a position, like play all over the board. We have the a5 pawn, which can be captured. We have an e4 pawn break that Hikaru is considering. Ultimately, the light-squared bishops come off, which I think overall probably benefits black, as white's light-squared bishop was very nicely positioned. Hikaru is going to probably pick up a pawn. Fabiano has now suddenly activated every single one of his pieces. Queen takes c4 played, and the queen dropping back to a2, and now Hikaru is just up a pawn. Fabi maybe could have done something a little bit better here, like faster counterplay on the b-pawn, but okay, he tries to, enable the movement of his bishop, and in the ensuing scramble, Hikaru now has 30 seconds on the clock, and what if I told you he proceeded to play 50 moves with this amount of time? Bishop takes a5. Fabi plays knight takes f4, the knight defends the queen, and we go to an endgame. Hikaru is up a pawn. Bishop back to c3, let the massaging begin. Not actually, I don't think he's physically touching Fabiano, but yeah, let the massaging begin in the position and let him try to convert the advantage. So we have knight to d2, right? We have knight to c4. Now he's going to start bringing his king, right? And he's going to activate the rook on the open file. All right, we have a trade. Now, apparently that was a bad move. Fabi didn't want to play hg because he was worried about this, but instead he does this, and that's apparently an even worse move because by taking this way and trying to create a pass pawn, he gave up the center, and now he gets swarmed in the center of the board with e4, and ultimately the pawns are going to come forward like this. By the way, Hikaru has worked his time back up to 1 minute and 34 seconds. That's because every single move he makes, he is gaining 10 seconds on the clock, because that's the format. And King E8 is a mistake, because now a ghost move appears, a move that doesn't look possible, and that's the move D6. A very nice idea. If you take with the pawn, you lose the knight. If you take with the bishop, you lose a piece. Bishop here. Hikaru playing excellent chess, but apparently taking the pawn, not the best, although this is still completely winning. He puts the rook on h4. He just needs to clean it up, and this should be easy peasy, right? He starts pushing his pawn. B5, he's now a few squares away from promotion. G3, okay, now suddenly Fabiano is getting a little bit of play. Maybe Hikaru here should have considered the bishop to E1 or something like that. I mean, just something, right? G3, okay, bishop D4, and this should be winning, but it's tricky. What's interesting about this position is I thought here that the move E5 is winning. I was in the playing hall at this moment. I thought, can't you go E5? Because if king F3, you can play E6, and if king G2, you can play E7. You know, and then if bishop d6, you can move the knight, or I even thought you can push some pawns. But so I was looking at the board, and I was like, is e5 the best move? E5, king f5, you have knight e3. You know, if this, maybe you play, I guess, king e4, and then this is a winning endgame. But this is a little bit tricky. And, you know, luckily I'm not the one actually playing the game. Bishop d4, ultimately a mistake, but bishop c7 is a draw. Fabiano can save this endgame down 2 pawns, but Hikaru very nice here, blocks the pawn, activates the pieces, and is winning. He's winning because Fabiano cannot both stop this and the advancement over here. Fabi's out of moves. He's just out of moves. Queen, the king can run up, and you can push, but my knight is getting back, and it is winning. This was Hikaru's first win. It took Hikaru quite a long time to ultimately wake up a little bit in this format, and you know, he has talked about the fact that he is he's ancient. You know, there are cobwebs forming on him, but no, I mean, joking aside, he did wake up. He had a lot of draws, but ultimately, and I think he lost the game. But well, let's see if he's able to form a streak together. Meanwhile, Magnus, right, and you know, the struggling player in the top 10 of this event has been Levon Aronian. And Magnus would try to put some pressure on him. By the way, here again, unique position, queen in the corner targeting this. That generally means that the best first move will be something with the queen. Although Stockfish also really likes the move e4, which is sort of counterintuitive. Now, both guys proceed to blunder on the 4th move. Knight c3 is the move that is chosen by Magnus. And now it actually would have been better for black to play bishop c4. And the fascinating thing about this move is that you trade and black is just up a pawn. Now, probably what happens here is you can gambit, all right? That's what you're going for, some sort of gambit like this with some attacking chances. But yeah, I mean, at least Stockfish thinks that the move knight c3 is a mistake because of bishop c4. It doesn't think that g6 is the right approach. Evidently, Levon didn't think that hanging on to the pawn was that good. He knew that Magnus would likely play for a gambit. And the position that we get from the opening is that Magnus cannot castle this way, which means he's going to have to castle queenside. And there it is, right? The long castle has occurred. We have takes. Shattering the pawn structure and even grabbing a pawn is Levon Aronian, simply a pawn up. Magnus really likes to gambit in this format. And I think he's also just generally down for a fighting game of chess against Levon. So we have d4. And we have d5, and Magnus seizes the initiative. It might have been better here for Levon to go for a quick counterplay with b5, b4, rather than bringing his knight, right? The b-pawn would have actually been quite a formidable problem to deal with. And yeah, check this out. b5, rook e1 threatening a checkmate. And you know how you get out of a checkmate here for black? Yeah, you can play rook f7, but why do that when you can castle? And queen e7... Knight c4 is actually a checkmate threat for white, and white already castled, so he's not going to do it again. Rook e2, you have like all sorts of sacrifices. The queen c3, it's really dangerous. So wrong approach here by Levon. And this is the kind of event, unfortunately, that that Levon is having. I mean, the second the alarm bells go off, sometimes you overreact, and he goes here. And as you can see, you know, he kind of chucks the pawn. By the way, I love that the position of the king and the rook is still, I mean, production team, rather product team for chess.com was not anticipating that pieces would be teleporting when they build game review, which is sort of hilarious. Now they have to deal with this, you know, ever-evolving rule set. of freestyle chess, and this is just totally winning because there is nothing you can do here. If you play dc6, you blunder your king, and if bc6, it's queen a6, and it's just blunders. And maybe Levon thought he, you know, he had something, he had some sort of resource, but it's just easy peasy. And honestly, yeah, this is the kind of event that unfortunately Levon is having. Magnus, though, winning several games back to back. And then he got a little bit lucky as well. It's kind of hilarious. He had a game which was one of the more absurd games that I think I've ever seen him play, which was this one. And in this game, he was playing Firouzja. By the way, you see this is the Fabi Hikaru opening. Magnus with the black pieces proceeded to get his knight just trapped on the edge of the board. I mean, it's just trapped right now. Then Firouzja trades the queens. He wins a pawn, and the position that Firouzja has is one where he has a knight for a pawn, and he has 344 versus 57. Okay, so he's gonna, he's obviously gonna start converting the game. I mean, everything is going swimmingly, and then suddenly, here he blunders. The winning move was bishop g7 check, followed by rook takes d7, and then some form of an infiltration, either with a rook or something like that. But sometimes you have a position that is just so winning, you cannot possibly believe your opponent will ever have a chance. Rook c1. And the insane thing about this position is that to escape these checks, you have to go here. And then bishop f6, knight f6, rook h3 would lead to you either losing material or repeating the moves anyway. So here, king e4, rook e2, king d4, takes. And you would not maybe lose material, but you would be almost losing in the endgame, if not just straight up losing in the endgame. And so Firouzja has to make a draw, which is wild because he just straight up had one more horse than his opponent. Like that is, and that's the kind of day Magnus is having. And when you save games like this, it really does boost your confidence. I mean, it's a really, really nice feeling. Now I'm going to show you two more games, okay? I'm going to go to the last round of the event. By the way, after Hikaru beat Fabiano, he also proceeded to beat Vincent Keimer. So the second that Hikaru felt that he could win a game, and he won a game, he kept winning. And that's generally what happens with players like that. They sometimes do need a little bit of time to warm up the engine. So Hikaru ended the day very, very well. Obviously, Magnus had a couple of things go his way. This was the final game of the day. Before the one I'm going to show you between Gukesh and Magnus, and yeah, we're going to be taking a look. Both of these guys have had a very, very good preliminary session. Jawahir Sindarov was just leading. I mean, he was just in first place, like basically wire to wire. And Firouzja tried to make a push at the end, and we'll see if Sindarov ultimately becomes the champion. Here we see the bishops getting opened up. Right, we see the bishop and the queen opening up, space being taken, center being taken by Sindarov, knight f3, e6. Now, already we are seeing a lot of pawns on light squares. The second I see stuff like that, I'm thinking, is there going to be a world where, Firouzja with the white pieces is able to control the dark squares? And that is evidently what he goes for, right, with g5 and then ultimately knight d3. Sindarov playing h5, locking up the structure, also just gaining some space. Nothing wrong with that. And now b4. Right, a total mess of a position. Pawns being pushed all over the board, bishops kind of staring into a closed center. But Sindarov is a very nice position. And in general, he's understood these positions very, very well. Queen d3 from Firouzja, queen e7, and now probably all of this advancement onto black's position is just not going to work because the queen flies over to the other side. And that is what Sindarov wanted. When Sindarov played the move h5, he did not want the pawn stuck back there, because he wanted to castle, so he wanted these pieces to kind of block out the white pieces, so the white pieces cannot come in and create any form of attack. Castles. Rook c8, knight d4, takes. And now queen e8. A little bit of a passive move. Firouzja looking for an infiltration into the black position. Knight f5 chosen by Sindarov. And now a big moment. Right? c4 is the move ultimately chosen. d4. Inviting to trade off the light squared bishop of black that hasn't moved with the light squared bishop of white that also hasn't moved, but at least is protecting the king. And now we have this move e4. Sindarov takes on e5, which is given a question mark. But it's funny because in the post-game analysis, he said he wanted to play c5 here. And after en passant, then he wanted to come back and at least have a target to come back into the game. And the point is that he's locked up the king. Like, it's going to be really hard to break through this position. You're going to have to sacrifice something, and white's pawns actually get more in the way than help. But instead of that, he goes here, and this one little move allows Firouzja himself to play the move c5. And now Sindarov is in a very, very bad position. And my camera frame is covering the game review so that obviously you don't see anything spoiled. But from here, it's like a little mountain that Firouzja basically hikes up. His pawns completely restrict the black blood flow, right? Like, black has no pawn play. Almost not a single one of his pawns can move. He tries, but a4. He tries again, but he's very quickly going to run out of any sort of moves. It's just a question of, does Firouzja have an infiltration spot and a breakthrough? Queen c4 and rook g1, and he's just going to win Sindarov's spot. And Sindarov's position is one of the worst I think I've ever seen. But this is a little bit of last round syndrome, because Sindarov before this game already clinched the spot in the quarterfinal, in the final 8. So he kind of relaxed, to be honest. And he still played quite well. He was absolutely right in his assessment of the position. He tried his best, but again, this is just about the worst position a human being can have. Black cannot move a single pawn without either losing it or physically not being able to move it. And yeah, Firouzja just absolutely steamrolls Sindarov in the final round. Just a fantastic game, but it was not, it didn't have to be that bad. Java here could have, brought back the knight. Ultimately, he made a really radical solution, which was give up the bishop completely. But as he said, he at least should have played the move c5. Had he done this, and Firouzja either would have taken, or not taken, black could have retreated and the position would have been completely locked and the player simply would have made a draw. But Sindarov didn't trust his instincts. Happens to the best of us, I would know. And ultimately Firouzja wins. And Firouzja actually won the entire round robin. He was in first place, stealing it from Sindarov in the end. And of course, we have to go to the main event of the evening. The first game between Magnus Carlsen and Gukesh, since Gukesh becomes the world champion. People are already calling for the head of Magnus, obviously. Those that believe that the generation is over, the dominance is over, and I would say on the heels of the split world championship, and is Magnus losing his edge, and the Genes Gate, and people just are ready, for the fall of the king. Well, we will see. Here we go. F4, B6, and Magnus goes for a pretty radical solution compared to the previous game, right? First of all, G4 is the move that Firouzja chose. Here we have F4, B3, and knight to H6. F4, knight, H6 is a very common thing, actually, to play against the bird opening, but okay, you don't have to know that. That won't be on the test. We have an immediate trade of dark squared bishops. Boys absolutely hate the bishops. G3, C5, E3, a very patient game, by the way, dare I say. This is like when you have a heavyweight fight, like a clash, and, they come out very tentative. They just come out feeling each other out for a minute. Both are kind of a little bit afraid to engage, but they will in a moment. Knight to C7, knight to D3, F6. Look at this, Gukesh coming out and back. He's bringing the knight out, he's bringing the knight back. He's feinting the punch, he's feinting. Now they clash, F5. The first engagement between the pawns in the center of the board. I look at this position, and right away I want to play this move E5, but it's not a good move because black is going to be very, very quick with counterplay with D6. Gukesh plays queen to E2. He might have actually been able to get away with pawn takes F5, pawn takes F5, and immediately striking at the heart of the Magnus Carlsen position. D4, this would have really, changed things up quite quickly, because if Magnus, absent-mindedly, well, okay, if he does that, he just loses, but if he takes the pawn, knight takes D4, this is hanging, and after bishop takes H1, how about knight takes F5, knight E7 smothered mate, almost, with king B7, right? There's a queen takes, but yes, I mean, obviously we would just take here, but queen E2 instead chosen, and another clash in the center of the board. Very, very tense. Are all the pieces going to get traded? Remember, Magnus and Gukesh are playing against each other in the 8th and final round of the round robin, and both of them are borderline qualified. So it's interesting that they're playing in a rapid format, and it's really nothing special, right? They both could draw the game. It doesn't really matter all that much. But we do have a big trade. We have queen takes E5 and Gukesh castles, which, as we know, is a mistake, apparently. And now, here, Magnus had an opportunity to play a really nice idea. He could have played rook e8. And the point of rook e8 is that after rook b somewhere, right, like, let's say defending this pawn, he castles. He castles queenside. And so now, this is a fantastic position, right? Opposite side castling, a lot of pressure on the center of the board, and ultimately d5 will happen, given the pin on the white queen. But okay, we have d5 anyway. d4, a counter-attacking shot. And here, it's kind of crazy. Like, the point of d4 is that after pawn takes, there is knight d3, queen e7, and Gukesh would sneak his pawn through. That is the point. Queen takes d4 is a mistake. The best move for black is queen e8. And if Magnus had played this move after the game, he would have had to urinate in a cup. I mean, I'm sorry for doping, not because the arbiters are freaky. Queen e8 is one of the most absurd things I've ever seen. Yeah, you just go queen e8. And the point is that now the knight no longer attacks the queen on e5, and white doesn't have an easy move. Because if white takes on c5, you actually do this. And now the bishop is completely walled out, right? So queen e8 is bananas. Instead of that, we have queen d4, and what does Gukesh do? He does what he does best. He takes over the initiative. Gukesh is a pawn down, but after knight to h3, he targets f5, he's targeting this, he's targeting knight f4, knight t5, and it's actually not the easiest position in the world if you're Magnus Carlsen. Rook f8, c4, finally Magnus castles his king, Gukesh centralizes the knight, and the position is very tense, but it's hinging on a lot of trades. There's going to be a lot of trades in a moment. Queen here, Magnus seals the position shut. I think Magnus, in the long run, really liked the prospect of a connected pass pawn, right? So his pawn is a passer, the only thing that white can do is blockade it, and it's protected really, really well. It's protected and protected and protected, right? Bishop a8, Gukesh picking up a pawn, and Magnus going for a queen endgame. But let it be known, the position's equal. I mean, it is in the balance. We don't have too much information. We have the knight going to d5, threatening a fork. We have rook g7, and now we have a trade of rooks. I mean, you know, you're getting into a position where you are playing ultimately Magnus's game. This is arguably the greatest endgame player ever. But white's got a great position. I mean, the only thing in white's position that's not good is this black pawn, right? You can bring the rook up, you can bring the knight in, but ultimately, this is probably just a draw. Gukesh re-centralizes his knight, Magnus starts bringing in, and offers a rook trade. Just offering a trade of rooks. I mean, and probably it will be a draw. I mean, you know, you kind of bring the king up, and everything is good. Gukesh, however, begins playing for a win, repositioning his rook on the edge of the board. With 50 seconds on the clock, not content with the draw, playing in the exact same style that he did the entire World Championship. First, Magnus declining a draw. First Gukesh declining any draws. Then Magnus no longer shuffling the pieces, right? Gukesh with 40 seconds on the clock versus 222. King d7, rook back to e2, king d6. But Gukesh hasn't been able to make any progress. Rook f2, pinning the knight to the rook. Now Magnus plays b5. b5 is when the heart starts pumping. That is when you start getting a little bit nervous. Because you're like, wait a minute, I cannot take. He's going to take, and he's going to try to bring his rook. Gukesh plays king f1 with 10 seconds on the clock. He gets another 10 seconds, 11 seconds, I should say. Take. Now the king centralizes. Now black wants rook b7, knight e3, king e4, king d3. Magnus has a plan. What is Gukesh going to do? He finds one of the best moves. Walks the king along the first rank, knight d6, and the only move, knight to f4. Now if knight c4, knight d3 check, the rook must be defended, the pawn will fall. Magnus here plays rook c7, also the best move, bolstering the pawn on the c5 square. And here, Gukesh had to find knight d3, rook e2, rook e5 with a counterattack. Not so simple. He does this first, and now it's not so clear what the best defensive measure is. Well, the best defensive measure is repeating the position. And ultimately trying to create discovered attack threats while this pawn is hanging. But Gukesh is human. And perhaps for the first time in a very long time, we have seen a human side of Gukesh as he plays knight to d5. But now he's losing, because he cannot defend his remaining pawn. And now, Magnus doesn't even take on c4. He plays knight e4. He is threatening rook b1 mate, but more than that, he's threatening d3, d2, and more than that, he's threatening knight takes g3, and the game is over. Out of nowhere, in a flash. g4 played, king centralizes in the center, Gukesh plays king f1, the pawn comes down to d3, Gukesh moves down, the king comes in, and Gukesh resigns. Pawn is falling, this is on the way, rook f7 anytime you need it, rook down to the first rank anytime you need it, and ultimately, the first game, as meaningless as this game was, they actually both make it, even if one of them were to lose. Magnus ultimately gets the win in freestyle chess rapid format. Oh, very tense, and maybe they will have a chance to play classical chess against each other. But it was an endgame, and this is one of the stages of the game you do not want to mess with Magnus unless you would like to go down in history as even better than him. So you got to respect the fighting spirit from Gukesh. You got to respect the fighting spirit from Magnus. There was a moment there he could have repeated the position. They were repeating the position, actually right here. Knight d6, knight d5, rook f7. There was a check, right? And Magnus decided that he wasn't, he wasn't going to make a draw, and he kept the game going. I think he also did really want to win this game. And so your standings after 8 rounds, unfortunately, Firouzja and Aronian are eliminated. They are in the bottom 2, and it is not up for discussion. So the final 8 are Firouzja and Javahir. Firouzja better on tiebreaks. Fabiano with 6, Magnus and Hikaru 5.5, and then you have Keimer and Abdusattorov. Now, I'm just going to quickly check. I'm just going to quickly check if we have pairings. And I don't think we do. And the reason I'm saying this is they decided they picked their pairings. You think you look at this and it's Firouzja Gukesh, Javahir versus Nodirbek, and you think it's Magnus Hikaru. No. The players decided in the technical meeting of the tournament, the top 3 get to choose who they play. Firouzja gets to choose 5 through 8. Javahir chooses the other, the other 3, etc. And Firouzja already said in an interview he won't choose Hikaru. Right, so Hikaru is lower on tiebreaks than Magnus, so he's going to choose one of these 3. Then Sindarov is going to choose one of these 3. I'm going to believe that Sindarov is not going to be choosing his countryman, which is quite interesting. And then Caruana gets to choose, and then Magnus is left with, whoever is not chosen between 5 through 8. So whenever the pairings come out, obviously the players should have, decided this after the rounds were done, but okay, I, don't decide the format. And then we will know, and then we will see. And tomorrow, we will begin the quarterfinals. The quarterfinals are 2 days long, with the classical chess, classical freestyle, let's say. And then it's, 9 and 10 is the quarterfinal, 11, 12 is semifinal, and then 13, 14 are the finals. That's all. You guys can check out Chessly. You know where to find me if you'd like more educational content. And if you want to join the Europe Tour 2025, tickets are going fast. Link is in the description. I will see you there. Get out of here for now.